What do you think is the lessons learned from the particular people involved? So we have lessons learned from maybe the women's community, lessons learned maybe from the unions, lessons learned with regard to government, lessons learned regarding alliances. What are some of the lessons, the key lessons learned?
One of the characteristics of the National Consumers League from its founding was the belief that consumers have a responsibility in helping to make sure that the goods that they purchase are made under conditions that are not exploitative. So I think that the main lesson might be this lesson of public responsibility for the quote-unquote private workplace, and that we need to not separate those two things. I think one of the extraordinary things about Frances Perkins, as Kirstin beautifully evokes her in both her book and just now, is that Perkins really took this to heart in a very deep way. In a lecture she gave in the early 60s about the fire, she recounted having seen what Kirstin just described, having witnessed it. And she said, I can't begin to tell you how disturbed the people were everywhere. It was though we had all done something wrong. It shouldn't have been. We were sorry. I mean, I think the remarkable thing about Frances Perkins is the sense of responsibility that she herself took for this. She was not responsible, but she did not pass the buck, as Kirstin pointed out. She accepted deep responsibility, and I think that maybe the main lesson is that we are all responsible, ultimately, for the conditions under which the goods that we rely on and that fuel our economy are produced.
I couldn't possibly agree more than I do with Joe that the interest that we have as a public in private enterprise needs to be expressed in regulation of business on behalf of workers and consumers. I think that is the key lesson. There is a second lesson, I think, that's often buried in both historical discussions and more recent or current discussions of the fire. And that is that while good public policy is absolutely crucial to preventing such events, such disasters, so is an independent, effective labor movement. And I say that that is a lesson of the fire itself, because for two reasons. I mean, one is that there were laws in New York at the time of the fire that forbade, for instance, the locking of exit doors during work hours, precisely to prevent, so that people could get out in the case of an emergency. Right? There was good policy on that, on the books in New York. But the owners of the Triangle Shirtwaist Factory ignored that good policy and locked the doors because they only wanted one door unlocked during the day because they so feared that their workers would try to get out with thread, with fabric, with maybe even finished shirtwaists at the end of the day or during their lunch period, 30 minutes for lunch usually. So in fear that they would lose profits through this theft by workers, they kept all the exit doors locked except one that they could oversee. And in fact, at the time of the fire, and Sara referred to this earlier, the fire actually occurred as the workers at the end of the day on a Saturday, as they were filing out, having their bags searched as they left the building. So that there was an incredible tight discipline exercised over them. And these doors were locked, and there were women found burned to death trying to get out of those exit doors that were illegally locked. So there was already good policy there, but it was not enforced. And what Rose Schneiderman and Clara Lemlich, two of garment workers who went on to become important labor leaders, and one of them, Rose Schneiderman, a New Dealer, what they claimed was if after that uprising of the 20,000, the Triangle Shirtwaist owners had recognized the union, those doors would have been unlocked. Mm-hmm. right? Because the workers themselves would have been able to say, we don't work until the doors are unlocked, right? There would have been, workers would have been empowered to make sure the law was enforced. And as it stood, with workers not empowered in that way, good policy wasn't worth anything, right? In fact, in some cases, good policy was something that owners could hide behind, right? Because they were in cahoots with factory inspectors and the like very often. I mean, there were also child labor laws, certain kinds of child labor laws that were constantly flouted at this point. And kids like Pauline Newman, another woman who would go on to become a really important labor leader. She was already an important labor leader at the time of the fire. She worked at the Triangle Fire when she was 12, and she worked in what was called the kindergarten, which is a place where kids from 9 to 12 years old snip the threads on a finished fabric so that wouldn't be threads sticking out. And she said the owners always knew, the contractors and the owners always knew when the factory inspector was coming, because there were laws that said that kids couldn't work at night. They could work during the day, but they couldn't work at night. And they often worked till 9. So they're absolutely flouting the law. But the owners always knew when the factory inspector was coming, and the kids were told to come on, get in the box, and they'd get into the box, and they would hide from the factory inspector, thinking, this is so fun. And sure, yeah, and it really was fun. But it just meant that, good policy, here is good policy, but utterly unenforced. And of course, we certainly witnessed that over and over again today. That is certainly a part of our current context. So in addition to good policy, an independent, effective, strong labor movement seems another crucial requirement of assuring factory safety.
Thank you. Kirstin?
Well, I think that, there are just so many lessons from the Triangle Fire, and so many of these issues just reverberate in all these different ways in our lives. I thought about it a lot recently with the nuclear power workers in Japan who are exposed to the radiation, and some of them risking their lives to stay. And now some of the news reports suggest that they've made some headway, but we know that a lot of people are going to die from that if they haven't died already. And so, we see the continuing issues of workplace safety, and in unexpected places we're not looking. And yet, we depend on workers to provide us with our basic needs. And that's one of the things I think that, when you think of what Frances Perkins and what she said about how to get things changed, to get attention drawn to things, she was a great believer in the need for having a public voice. In her case, she learned it by being in the suffrage movement. What would happen in the suffrage movement is women wanting the right to vote would go and they would pick places that were street corners where there was a saloon on each of the 4 corners, because there'd be a lot of men gathered there at any hours of the day and night. And you could go and pull up a soapbox. A friend, girlfriend would come with you, hold up the sign behind you, vote for women, and a woman would get up on the box and start to talk, and pretty soon the men would pour out of the saloon because of the interesting spectacle of a girl on a box to look at. Out they'd come, and a lot of times the men coming out would be drunk. They thought the idea of women voting was stupid. They'd start to ridicule the women. Sometimes they'd throw stuff at them. But Frances Perkins learned from this to confront a hostile crowd and to try to get people to change their opinion by talking to them directly. She used humor to do this a lot, but it was brave. And that was one of the things she always made the point of saying is, there is no advantage to going to talk to people who already agree with you. You've got to go talk to the people who don't agree with you, and humor makes the difference. I feel like in a lot of ways right now, we've all lost the ability to use our public voice. In lots of ways, we've all been bought off. Our employers get us to sign contracts now saying that we won't talk to the media. But the fact is, what that means is that a lot of people aren't talking about issues of public concern because they're afraid that they'll somehow hurt their situation with their employer. A lot of people are just simply afraid to talk. A lot of people are afraid to put their names out there for fear that someone's going to steal their identity by them putting their name out there. The fact is that people have got to talk we're in a time of enormous change, just like Joe and Robyn pointed out, how many incredible parallels there are between then and now. But just like then they found ways to resolve and improve conditions, there are opportunities here too for those of us who will look and step up to the plate and begin to talk. Because Frances Perkins said, you only need 50 people working together to make anything happen. 50 people harnessed together. I mean, how many do we have in this room right now? Like, we've got like 80 here at least. You know, surely within us there are 50 people who can make some things happen. I think that's what Frances Perkins would say.